The era of growth is a ghost. The systemic drift has reached its terminal coordinate. You are not witnessing a demographic shift. You are witnessing a biological foreclosure. In the visceral history of the architect, reproduction was the ultimate act of crystallization. It was the physical deployment of a high-integrity war chest into the future. The primal primate lived in a world of absolute friction. To produce an heir was to build a fortress of flesh and bone that could withstand the freezing rain, grip the cold steel, and expand the territory. Reproduction required a massive surplus of ATP. It was the highest possible metabolic expenditure. The body was a hardened node because it had to protect the genetic surplus against the entropy of the wild. In the year 2026, the machine has identified the child as a source of terminal systemic friction. A child is a high-entropy asset. It requires 20 years of unmonitored ATP investment. It creates solid bonds that are hard to tax and impossible to fully process. To ensure the total velocity of the extraction grid, the primate must be biologically liquidated before it can propagate. This is the visceral breach. Analyze the biological price of the synthetic environment. The grid has reformatted the visceral substrate into a hostile womb, the metabolic siphon. Your mitochondria are overclocked by the always-on grid. The body is in a state of chronic systemic inflammation. This is terminal ATP exhaustion. When the cells are burning their marrow just to survive the next notification, there is no surplus for the lineage. The body enters a state of metabolic emergency. It shuts down the reproductive signal to conserve the remaining voltage for the user. Hormonal liquidation. The endocrine system has been hijacked by sensory endocrine disruptors. The electromagnetic smog and the high-frequency blue light have performed a surgical extraction of the circadian rhythm. Melatonin is gone. Testosterone is in freefall. Estrogen is unregulated. The hormonal readout has been dismantled. The primate is no longer a breeder. It is a hormonal radiator, siphoning its energy into the digital vacuum. The softening of the shell. Without the high-friction labor of the physical world, the body undergoes systemic decay. The musculoskeletal system, the vessel of the lineage, is liquid. You are a biological filter for the grid's toxins. In 2030, the primate will not want to give birth because the body will lack the structural integrity to support life. The womb has been processed into a data center. The standard of living has become the standard of sterility. You believe you are choosing convenience, but you are actually providing the grid with a high-fidelity map of your own biological obsolescence. The architect builds for the century. The grid liquidates the womb for the quarter. The shell is leaking. The energy is gone. The host is bankrupt. Part 2. The neural layer. The neural rot of the nurturing signal. The second layer of the hunt is the war for the reproductive intent through cognitive arbitrage. In the solid world, the brain used the basal ganglia to ensure the protection of the offspring. In the year 2026, the grid has hijacked this primal signal to induce parental psychosis. The neural rot of the nurturing instinct begins with the total monetization of proximity. The machine has discovered that the basal ganglia, the ancient reactive core, cannot distinguish between a real biological heir and a digital proxy. By flooding the neural pathways with high-fidelity nurturing hits, digital pets, social media engagement, virtual legacies, the grid performs a surgical extraction of the parental drive. Dopaminergic arbitrage. You are no longer nurturing, you are subscribing. This is neural rot. The grid induces a state of synthetic fulfillment where the basal ganglia are satisfied by the blue light of the terminal. The architect's seat, the prefrontal cortex, is bypassed. Why endure the 20-year friction of a real child when the grid provides a legacy for zero ATP and zero risk? Neural extraction of the future. The grid uses attention arbitrage to buy your focus for the price of a digital like and sell it to the highest bidder on the data ledger. Your myelin never thickens around a long-term strategy for the lineage because your attention is being shredded by the millisecond. In 2030, the brain will be cognitively soft. It will lack the capacity to process the high-friction complexity of a child. The status trap of the solo. The grid has reformatted isolation into sovereignty. This is the systematic destruction of the sync. Reproduction is the ultimate synchronization of two nodes. The market of one ensures that the sync is impossible. You are rewired to see the child as a competitor for resources and a drain on the visibility rating. Analyze the 10-year cognitive rot. The grid ensures that you are too informed to be instinctual and too anxious to be parental. This induces a chronic, high-frequency ATP exhaustion. You are becoming a cognitive proxy. proxy, a biological unit of processing power for the grid with zero narrative depth. Your thoughts are no longer solid contributions to your own bloodline. They are interest payments on the debt of your sensory addiction. The basal ganglia are in a state of permanent redline. The synthetic world provides a constant stream of virtual heirs that keep the primate in a state of chronic manic decay. You are cognitively soft. You cannot endure the friction of a crying child or the long silence of the hearth. You are addicted to the validation pulse, the umbilical cord of metrics that links your ego to the central server. Reality is low resolution compared to the high-fidelity sterilization of the grid. In 2030, the choice not to have children will be marketed as self-empowerment, but it is actually just the final extraction of the reproductive signal. The neural rot is complete. The signal is lost in the noise of the debt. The architect watches the fire die. The serf begs for a premium access to a childless void. The hunt for the future was once the primary driver of biological crystallization. In the visceral history of the architect, a child was not a lifestyle choice or a social accessory. It was the physical deployment of a high-integrity war chest into the next century. Evolution is a financial ledger of ATP. It favors the entity that can secure territory, accumulate resources, and project its genetic signal past the event horizon of its own death. The primal primate lived in a world of absolute friction. To ensure the survival of the offspring was to conquer the entropy of the wild. You fought the rain, you forged the steel, and you performed the push-ups of survival to ensure that the us expanded while the them decayed. The basal ganglia were hardwired to reward the capture of resources for the brood. Success, or rather crystallization, was measured in the density of the lineage. The architect was the one who could build a fortress that outlasted his own breath. In the year 2026, the systemic drift has engineered an evolutionary dead end. The grid has identified biological growth as a massive source of systemic friction. A lineage is a decentralized power structure that is hard to monitor, hard to tax, and impossible to fully process. To optimize the extraction of the species, the growth signal must be reformatted into crystallized stasis. Analyze the epigenetic liquidation of the inheritor. The body responds to its environment. When the environment is a frictionless slurry of digital consumption and managed poverty, the body silences the genes for expansion. We are witnessing the terminal softening of the genetic signal. The resource signal. In the solid world, the brain looked for surplus before breeding. In the 2030 coordinate, the grid ensures that surplus is a mathematical impossibility for the liquidated masses. The basal ganglia, sensing a state of permanent ATP exhaustion, trigger the epigenetic kill switch. The primate enters a state of biological hibernation. It stops seeing the future because the future is a liability. The liquidation of the alpha. In the visceral history, the alpha was the protector of the brood. In the synthetic world, the grid is the alpha. It provides the protection, security, data, income. In exchange for the sterilization of the node, the masculine drive to protect territory is diverted into the digital hunt for status points. The war chest of the lineage is traded for a premium subscription to the void. Reproductive arbitrage. The grid provides high-fidelity simulations of achievement and legacy for zero metabolic cost. Why endure the 20-year friction of raising a child, the risk of failure, the expenditure of ATP, the weight of the steel, when the machine provides a virtual heir in the form of a digital avatar or a social credit score? This is the status trap of the evolutionary dead end. Your lineage is being erased through metabolic choice. By the year 2030, the primate will have been rewired to view its own offspring as a predator, a consumer of its limited ATP, and a threat to its fragile stability index. The fire of Prometheus, the outward-facing technology of expansion, is being extinguished. It is replaced by the cold LED sun of self-optimization. The architect builds the bunker, the subscriber builds the cage, the species is being pruned. The hard nodes of expansion are being replaced by soft nodes of compliant stasis. The hunt is over. The predator has been processed into a service node. The genetic yield of the species is dropping to zero. The extraction grid no longer requires new humans. It requires perfected users. Every child born into the solid world is a potential point of resistance, a node that might seek to own territory or accumulate steel. By the 2030 coordinate, the grid will have successfully marketed the end of the lineage as the ultimate moral crystallization. You will die alone, believing you saved the planet, while the grid harvests the last of your cellular energy. Part 4. The systemic dissection, the architecture of the sterile ghetto, and the liquidation of the household. The fourth layer is the total enclosure of the household substrate. The machine understands a fundamental truth. A solid family is a point of zero entropy that resists the grid's total extraction. To achieve the final liquidation liquidation of the primate, the household must be reformatted into the pod. This is the architecture of the 2030 sterilization. Dissect the economic blockade of the future. In the year 2026, the systemic drift has moved toward the total monetization of time. A child is a negative yield asset in the grid's ledger. It requires unmonitored time, untaxed labor, and untracked resources. From the perspective of the machine, a parent is a malfunctioning unit that is not producing data or consuming services at maximum velocity. The architecture of the pod. Look at the smart cities being built for 2030. They are not designed for families. They are designed for solitary consumption nodes, small, high-efficiency enclosures with zero space for the friction of another human being. The sterile ghetto is not a slum. It is a high-tech facility where the walls are made of screens and the floor is made of data ports. It is an environment that makes reproduction a physical and logistical impossibility. The status trap of the childless elite. The grid markets freedom from the lineage as the ultimate status symbol. To be childless is to be agile. It is to be liquid. It is to be systemically compliant. Raising a child is being reformatted as a low-status primitive activity for the unoptimized. This is the status trap of the modern serf. You believe you are free because you have no anchors, but anchors are the only things that keep you from being swept into the extraction grid. Extraction of the nurturing signal. The grid has dismantled the tribe and replaced it with the platform. The energy that once went into the protection of the offspring is now siphoned into the engagement economy. You are working 80 hours a week to pay for the access to a digital world where you have zero territory. Your ATP is being mined to fuel the machine's own crystallization, while your own lineage undergoes terminal entropy. The architecture of control is now a metabolic ledger. The grid monitors your genetic compliance. If a node shows signs of solid intent, if it attempts to build a private redoubt or a large family, the grid increases the level of systemic friction in its life. It raises the resource tax. It throttles the opportunity signal. It makes the cost of the future higher than the price of the present. The elite solids are the only remaining architects of the bloodline. While they sell the masses the ethics of the voluntary extinction, the masters are consolidating their own solid lineages. They are the ones who hold the private lands, the unmonitored steel, the debt-free territory where children can still breathe unmetered air. They are the owners of the genetic surplus. You are the fuel for the sterile grid. In 2030, the home will be a service you subscribe to, not a territory you defend. Without territory, there is no place for the lineage to take root. Without roots, the species becomes liquid. This is the final systemic drift. The enclosure is complete. The household has been liquidated. The future is a ghost in the machine. The sterilization protocol has transitioned from a systemic nudge to a mandatory biological state. The primate is no longer a vessel for the future. It is a terminal node of extraction. The grid has successfully decoupled the biological drive from the physical reality of reproduction through a decade of continuous ATP exhaustion. 1. The visceral zero, the mitochondrial graveyard. The body in 2036 is a biological ruin. 10 years of chronic informational stress and sensory flooding have performed a total visceral breach. In the history of the architect, the body was the war chest of the bloodline, a hardened machine forged in the freezing rain to carry the weight of the next generation. Metabolic sterility. The 2036 unit possesses zero metabolic surplus. Every watt of ATP is siphoned into the maintenance of the digital interface and the survival of the liquid self. The surge of energy required for the crystallization of life is a mathematical impossibility. The mitochondria are burnt out, adrenal ash in a hollow shell. Hormonal liquidation. The endocrine system is a vestigial ruin. Natural testosterone and estrogen have been replaced by stability proxies, synthetic hormones designed to maximize labor output and minimize the search for a mate. The primate is biologically incapable of the high-friction labor of birth. Tactile poverty. The body has lost the nurturing signal. The skin, the muscles, and the bone density have regressed into a soft state. The 2036 unit is a biological radiator for the grid's heat, but it is too cold to sustain a lineage. The womb is a deactivated data center. 2. The neural zero, the termination of the heir. The neural rot of 2036 is the absolute end of the parental drive. The basal ganglia, the ancient core that once protected the brood, have been surgically remapped to the server. The brain now identifies a physical child as an efficiency leak. The proxy sink. There is no longer a parent, there is only the user. The nurturing instinct has been reformatted into to engagement with the grid. Independent empathy for a biological child has been replaced by high-fidelity interaction with digital proxies. To desire a real high-friction child is to experience immediate neural entropy, a feeling of systemic failure induced by the algorithm. Moral emulsion of the species. Values have been liquidated into personal optimization. In 2036, morality is a function of your contribution tier. The unit will betray its own bloodline and delete its own history to maintain its stability rating. The self is the only remaining god, and it is a god that is sterile. Temporal amnesia. Memory of the lineage is gone. The unit does not remember the names of its ancestors. It remembers the update history of its profile. The 30-day billing cycle has replaced the 100-year strategic view. The future is not a person. The future is a data dump. 3. The evolutionary zero. The end of the predator. The lineage of the architect is extinct. The systemic drift toward 2036 has engineered a state of absolute genetic zero. The fire of Prometheus, the technology of the hunt and the hearth, is dead. The end of inheritance. There is nothing to pass on. No land, no steel, no territory. The units in 2036 possess zero solid assets. Their legacy is a stream of digital permissions that expire when the pulse stops. The war chest of the species has been emptied by the masters of the grid. Epigenetic silence. The genes for expansion and territorial defense have been methylated into permanent silence. The primate no longer seeks to conquer the future. It seeks to subsidize its decay. The species is undergoing a quiet, comfortable liquidation. Reproduction is seen as a low-resolution biological error that creates too much entropy. The synthetic dead end. The primate no longer breathes, it generates. But code does not possess blood. Code does not possess ATP. The digital heir is a zero-sum game played on a rented server. 4. The systemic zero, the sterile ghetto, and the solids. The grid is finalized. Total demographic enclosure is achieved through hormonal metering and the status trap of the liquid life. Genetic feudalism. The elite solids hold the keys to the last wombs. They own the raw land, the unmonitored bloodlines, and the unmetered steel. They inhabit redoubts of cold stone, where children still breathe real air and feel the rain. They maintain their own crystallization of power, while they force the liquids into the sterile ghetto. The final extraction. The last remaining biological material of the liquidated masses is harvested for the solids to maintain their own longevity. The user is not a person. The user is a biological resource pool. The grid does not care about your future. It cares about your metabolic yield. The final view. The real future is a ghost. The 2036 unit will live in a world of code and empty cradles until its biological shell is liquidated into the grid's recycling system. The architect builds the bunker for his heirs. The user is the ghost in the terminal. The womb is empty. The ledger is full.